Right, welcome everybody. I'm Lucian Fogoros, and as I mentioned, I'd like to kick off the keynote with introducing the moderator. I'm the host for today. You'll see me on and off, and I'd like to transfer over to Diana Marinescu from MIT Bootcamps, who will moderate this session. Welcome, Diana. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lucian. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Diana Marinescu, as Lucian mentioned, and I'm an attorney with a background in business litigation and also with a passion for MIT entrepreneurship and global startup ecosystem. Thank you so much for joining this session of the IIoT World's Digital Manufacturing Day. Please remember to ask questions in the Q&A session to secure an invite to the IIoT World VIP community valued at $1,000. For our keynote speech today, I am very proud to introduce Dr. Irene Petrick, a former professor and currently a senior director of industrial innovation at Intel Corporation, who will talk about how to find success in the next normal and discuss the results of a recent Intel study on global transing impacting manufacturing opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Diana, can you see that screen? We're fine?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Irene Petrick. I am here to share with you some insights about how we think success is going to happen in what we're calling the next normal. So let me talk about the study that we've worked on. My colleague and I, Faith McCrary, have been working for the last 4 years looking at global trends in manufacturing, particularly around digital transformation. We've got over 10,000 data sets, over 500 participants from over 400 companies. And I'm going to spend a lot of time today really focusing on a subset of all of this, which is what we call the Manufacturing 100. This was a group of approximately 100 companies. It started out more than 100 companies and ended up substantially less, only 81 companies after the 3 phases, primarily because of attrition as the result of COVID. So we actually are able to look at COVID over a 3-phase study that lasted 18 months. And we've been able to follow this and position it with respect to what was happening in 2018 and 2019 also. So let me start by saying that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And this is a quote from a science fiction writer that gets used frequently. But what it really means is that when we talk about digital transformation, when we talk about the intelligent factory, what we're really seeing is that not every factory is fully automated. We have what we call a digital intensity measure. And this digital intensity measure really says, from a company perspective, how much have you replaced labor with digital tools, either on the shop floor, in the enterprise, in human resources, etc. So broadly across your enterprise, how much have you digitized and replaced labor with digital tools? You can see here that 29% of the respondents of that over 500 participants say that they're really at high digital intensity. In other words, most of their factory and most of their supporting enterprise systems are already digital. Unfortunately, a quarter of the sample that we've been working with say, oh boy, we're really not very far along on our journey to digital transformation. We are still heavily manual in both our manufacturing processes and in many of our enterprise processes. And almost half, the remainder, 46%, say we're at medium intensity. We have a balance of digital and labor to support our production activities. And this will come up a couple of different times because the problems that people are facing pre-COVID and now when we are coming out of COVID, hopefully, and entering the next normal, these digital intensity will matter in terms of what people are seeing. So what are we seeing around COVID and how disruptive it is. Well, first of all, we asked our Manufacturing 100 participants, how disrupted has COVID been in your operations? 60% of them said it's significant. It's causing serious delays in manufacturing and it's requiring a substantial effort to manage. 42% are saying they expect these serious disruptions to continue for at least 3 to 6 months. And the most recent data we have suggests it's more like 9 to 12 months still. So how is COVID disrupting manufacturing? Well, first of all, 71% say it's component or material shortages and constrained supplies. 65% are saying it's continued breakdowns in global supply chains. 61% increased supply chain costs. 60% increased lead time for orders, 58% unexpected supplier poor performance. You're hearing a theme here, right? You're hearing it's a supply chain issue, it's a transparency across the supply chain issue, and it's an unexpected set of breakdowns in the supply chain that are making operations much more difficult. Continuing on, 57% said it's really difficult in communication and collaboration challenges, partly due to remote work. We have workers getting sick, inaccurate forecasts, operational productivity losses, and increased customer demand. So we picked these because these were the ones that at least half the sample or more said were serious problems in their day-to-day operations. So what's the COVID imprint? What are we thinking? Well, our Manufacturing 100 told us that COVID has caused or amplified 71% of the biggest challenges in manufacturing today. And one of the Manufacturing 100 participants said things are getting overlooked, clutter is forming, people are tired, and things are getting forgotten. The foundation is crumbling in some areas, as maintaining employees is hard. And that's a theme you're going to hear several times in my presentation. So manufacturing is a productivity issue. It's an efficiency issue. It is now becoming a skills and labor shortage issue also. When we ask the Manufacturing 100, how are they mitigating? What are they doing to mitigate some of these issues? And what mitigations are still in place after 18 months of dealing with this pandemic? 63% said increased protection for workers who are on site. 60% said increased acceptability of remote work. 49% said an increased focus on company agility and resilience. I want to point out this increased acceptability of remote work for a moment though. In 2019, when we asked companies, how much of your data are you willing to share? How much are you working in the cloud? Less than 10% said we want to work in the cloud and we want to share data. And almost nobody said remote work was an option for their workers. And if they did have any kind of remote work, most of those workers were in the engineering or professional services areas. So this is a dramatic change in just an 18-month period. We've gone from almost zero remote work to over 60% remote work. We don't think that's going to go back to zero again. So what companies are struggling? What are they dealing with right now? 92% said unexpected production variances are once again top of mind. 74% said unexpected supply chain variances, and we heard that already in a previous slide. But these unexpected supply chain variances that are being driven by COVID are also exacerbated by shifting customer demand and global issues. So it's not just my supply chain, it's the customer demand is shifting. Who would ever have thought, for example, that in our supply chains, fabric would become a critical supply? But when we started going to protective devices and protective gear, fabric was a major shortage. So we're seeing not only a change in the supply chain and disruption, but we're also seeing a change in what's being considered critical components now. Finally, 74% said resource fragility. And this gets once again to the hiring problems of skilled workers and workers being sick. And I'll comment on this from our experience. Normally, when Faith and I stand up a study, we expect to see 3 to 4% attrition as people move jobs from one part of the study to the next. Over the 18 months that we've been following these Manufacturing 100, we started with 117 companies, thinking that we were probably going to have a little bit higher percentage attrition. What we've come to is from 117 down to 81. We saw more than double the average attrition. And these weren't people just leaving a job in manufacturing. Most of these people, when we followed up with them, left manufacturing completely. We're beginning to see that level out now, but manufacturing is in a world of hurt right now from a skill set and a worker number perspective. And that's driving some of the demand, increased demand for digital tools. So let's look at that digital intensity for a moment that I talked about, and let's think about the current challenges and some observations with respect to digital intensity. Companies, that 25% of companies I mentioned that are in the low digital intensity, really are struggling with reduced workforce problems and reduced operational levels. Those medium digital intensity, at 46%, are most likely to report technology challenges and inadequate infrastructure for remote work. High digital intensity companies are least likely to indicate a lack of technology infrastructure to support remote work. And there are some geographic differences also. Europe and Africa were most likely to call out COVID as the root cause of their problems, with Asia Pacific saying, yeah, we were dealing with COVID, but that's not the real root cause of our problems. So we are seeing some geographic differences and certainly seeing digital intensity as an indicator. Data at a distance. In the next normal, we're going to see data in the cloud. We're going to see activities in the cloud. Remember, I said that it was less than 10% were willing to work in the cloud in 2019. That's now at 68%. We're not going to go backward in time, I don't believe. This is a really telling slide because it really focuses on the investments and how investments are evolving. And the way to read this slide is to begin on the left-hand side with the investments that were planned in 2019. You can see that 51% of the respondents in 2019 said, hey, we're going to do artificial intelligence projects. 44% predictive or big data analytics, smart machinery equipment, etc. Look what happened at COVID on the right-hand side. The investments that were planned in 2020 that were reported, the spending went up. 43% of companies said they're increasing digital spending, but look where they're increasing it. It was all around networking and cloud capabilities, cybersecurity, remote monitoring. So we're talking about continued digital investments, but with a real shift in where those investments were happening. Now in 2021, as we're going toward the next normal, 57%. So we're getting even more companies saying they're increasing their digital investments. But look where they're investing in that bright blue circle there toward the middle of the bottom. 67% are still doing infrastructure upgrades. 42% are doing big data analytics and AI, 35% automation, 35% remote monitoring, 22% smart upgrades to existing systems. And the caveat there in those existing system upgrades is to make work easier. And we think this is directly correlated to the skill sets and the skills gaps and the labor gaps and shortages. So what usages are pulling investments? Remote monitoring, decision support, workflow automation, worker performance, instructions and checklists for workers, securing data and other assets, remote control, remote operator training, self-optimizing processes. Once again, you're seeing a theme. If I have to have workers out of my factories, I have to have a way to support them that basically brings the situational awareness of the factory to that remote space. And that's becoming a major issue that people are investing in and concerned about. So where is the factory heading? Well, in 2019, most of the investments that companies were talking about were really exploratory, particularly around artificial intelligence. In 2020, almost all of those investments were very tactical. How do I get support for remote workers? How do I do remote troubleshooting? Now in 2021, we're seeing a return to a little longer term view with a return toward a longer term ROI expectation. So we're getting back to normal a bit in terms of ROIs and expectations. Automation is still a very strong player in company efficiencies, but the drivers for automation are changing. So what has COVID accelerated? Well, it's accelerated the demand for resilience of my operations. Do I understand what's happening? Do I understand where it's happening? Can I predict and troubleshoot? And then how do I take automation? And we used to worry about automation replacing workers and driving them out of the workforce. Now automation is being pulled into factories because of labor shortages and skill shortages. Finally, visibility in context. What's happening in the factory itself? I need to be able to translate that to remote workers. It means I have to rethink about where data is situated and where it's computed and where it's stored. And I have to think about when and how to present data to these remote workers. So even though we're seeing some investments continue, we are seeing the relative importance of the interaction between humans and machines as being much more important to make those workers who are left much more efficient. So where are companies on their journey? This is a very sobering slide, I think. 82% are confident that they're not going to just survive, they're going to thrive in the next normal. But when you look at the numbers, 28% are actively formulating a vision, 22% are actively driving execution, 19% are experimenting and figuring it out. That leaves almost a third of companies who aren't doing much at all. If you're one of these top 3 categories, you're in pretty good shape relative to the overall expectations of how COVID is changing things. However, if you're in that 31%, you really should be aggressively looking at what your competitors are doing and what leading industrial leaders are doing. And you need to begin thinking about how you're going to mimic or control or link to them. So what are the influencers of success? Let me get to the heart of all of this. 74% of our manufacturing 100 said they expect manufacturing in the sector to be stronger overall as we get past and into this next normal. And that's compared to 20% of this same group in 2020. So what do they think is going to drive success? 92% of the respondents said it's the capacity for change, the organizational capacity for change. 86% said the degree of success in retaining workers. This is a major difference from what we saw in 2019. 77% said robustness and resilience of production operations, and that's primarily driven through data and the transparency and predictability that data enables us to have. 67% said communication and collaboration across my organization, and then 65% said that success is going to come from the extent to which my company is willing to accommodate worker expectations. So you can see that there's a cultural issue here that's driving some of this, a production issue and a collaboration issue. So this is my final slide, and then I'll take questions, Diana. There's a famous quote, Peter Drucker, famous strategist, said, "Culture eats strategy." And we are seeing that very specifically. I can have all the strategy in the world, but if I don't have leaders who create a culture for innovation, a culture for resilience, a culture with expectations that takes into account expectations of workers, then I'm going to have trouble. Resilience is based upon data, transparency, and organizational agility, and then the deploying and maintaining technology as a critical skill. So what we're seeing is a change in skill sets needed, a change in numbers of people needed, a change in the way we collect and use data, and a change in the culture and leadership within the organization. And those are the things that really we're seeing reported about what's going to lead to success in that next normal. Diana, if there are questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Of course, Dr. Patrick. So I have a Johan from Zurich who would like to know how to increase protections for workers and specifically how to mitigate this in terms of COVID disruptions.
So the kinds of protections we're seeing for workers have to do, and this is a real challenge in a factory, because I can take unnecessary workers off the floor, the non-essential workers, the support workers. And in fact, we're seeing companies who did that. Many of the companies who took non-essential workers off the factory floor said they saw an increase in productivity, some as much as 20% jump. So simply changing the numbers on the floor helps. But factories have a fixed real estate, and so moving people around is much more difficult, particularly in companies like food processing, for example, where I have very fixed automation lines that require workers to be much more closely aligned. So we're seeing process changes happen. We're seeing temperature, we're seeing people using cameras to track workers, but really to track who's where in a factory and who's interacting with whom. There are some privacy issues to that, however. And then we're still seeing a lot of protective equipment, everything from full body suits to masks, to these masks that have shields across them. So we're seeing both physical barriers as well as tracking and health monitoring kinds of issues.
Thank you, Dr. Petrick. Dawn is asking if you see trends in placing manufacturing closer to consumption to reduce supply chain disruptions.
Yes, I didn't report that here because the movement of a more localized supply chain takes some time. It's a delayed reaction. We are seeing an interest in localized production. And when I say localized, it's probably regional. It's probably geographic, not as much having to go from PRC to Europe or PRC to the US. So there's a desire to reduce the global shipping requirements and needs. And there's also, I think we're going to see a rise in the use of additive manufacturing and 3D printing to do more of this localized production too. I didn't report those out here because those are lagging indicators right now.
Thank you again, Dr. Petrick. And one last question probably is also coming from Don, who was wondering if you think the government action supported or made the supply chain more challenging.
I usually get a government question in here when I present some of this data. Interestingly, when we asked people what were the key influencers, people felt that government was less than 20% of an influencer in terms of their decisions right now. So when you say government policies around vaccinations certainly has been an influencer. But in terms of actual factory operations, the workers and the managers themselves claim it's been less than a 20%, at least to date, it's been less than a 20% influencer.
I understand. Would you, it's already our time.
Yes.
To go. So I guess with these outstanding answers, we conclude the keynote speech on finding success in the next normal. And we kindly invite you to our next session on making the transition to the smart factory, areas for consideration. Please keep in mind that there will be a random drawing at the end of the day for participants to win a copy of the book Manufacturing Mastery by Rebecca Morgan. Thank you for your participation and enjoy the rest of the day. Dr. Petrick, thank you so much for your presence today.
Thank you for having me, and I'll make these slides available and we'll look at the questions that are left and I'll respond to them directly.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.